Atheist Alliance International Podcast.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the AAI Podcast. I'm Jason Sylvester, aka Diogenes of Mayberry, and joining me today is one of the AAI affiliates, Randolf Richardson, who is president of Canadian Atheists, and he's here to talk about some of the things that are going on there in Canada. So welcome, Randolph, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you and get onto your program. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So this is the first time you've chatted with us, I believe? Yeah.
I didn't know you were running YouTube programs, online interviews and whatnot before. So
okay.
This seems all new to me.
It's fairly new. I think this year we kind of got going with that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Canadian Atheists and what you guys are doing?
Oh, sure. Canadian Atheists, which is an AAI affiliate, we started off in about 2014, I think, is when I founded the organization as a federal organization that advocates for atheism for atheists here in Canada. Where some of the things we're doing, the basic things that motivate us are to counter the vilification of atheists and to try to bring an end to the discrimination or the stigma that occurs. We're fortunate that here in Canada, it isn't as big of a problem as it is in some other countries. So we don't have to use a really aggressive approach on it. We're fortunate that we can use a more gentle and easygoing kind of approach, and we're able to reach out to a lot of people this way. We were setting up a number of events as well, because we want to bring in together a sense of community that a lot of religious institutions are well known for, and some have had over 2,000 years of practice working on, roughly. So we're looking at doing the same kind of thing for atheists, and there has been a lot of interest in it. Unfortunately, we've had to put those plans on hold, because just as we were about to start putting them into effect, the pandemic for the COVID-19 coronavirus came along, and so we put it all on hold because we didn't want to contribute to making the pandemic worse, so, and the health regulations went out, so we went along with that. So we're hopeful that we're coming to a point where we're going to be able to start these events up in the near future. It all depends on what the Canadian government recommends for organizations like ours to be able to do. We're going to follow along with all those, with all their recommendations, of course. And once we have that, then we'll have regular monthly kind of activities and whatnot that people can get together with. We're also looking at putting together something similar to various conventions that other atheism organizations have run over the years here in Canada. So we'll be we've figured out what the insurance costs would be for running such an event, and narrowed it down to a number of places. We're going to have to do that over again, I suspect, because some things have changed. Some organizations have unfortunately gone out of business as well, because business went down for them during the pandemic. So, but that's okay. We're thinking, hopefully, we can maybe bring in about 500 seats, find a place with 500 seats, and bring in some various speakers to come and present and talk about various topics that they're knowledgeable on, just like what normally happens at these other conventions. And so hopefully that goes well. And we've had good feedback from people that they're very interested in attending these kind of events, which makes additional sense now that people haven't been able to do this during the pandemic, and are probably very interested in doing that. But that event, when we do that, we want to make sure that people from other countries are free to enter the country and travel here for that. So that we may not be able to start that one right away, because we're wanting to attract an international audience on that one. That event will be called the Atheist Interchange, unless we come up with a better name, but that's the name that we have for now. And so nothing's really written in stone on it yet, but that's kind of what seems to be what's forming now. We're also, I'm working with Neil the 604 Atheist, another sub-project of Canadian Atheists, and he is our community advocate. Is the title we gave him because he wasn't sure what title to get. He's not big on titles, so we came up with that, and he said, that sounds great. He's really good with this kind of thing, so he's very well suited for it. And so he and I, we donate blood regularly every 2 months. And with Canadian Blood Services, and we do various things like that. So we're going to start a program called True North Talk, which is going to be an atheism call-in program that runs from here in Canada. And people may be familiar with other shows like the Atheist Experience is probably the most well-known one, and there's many other programs like it. Many of them branch off from the ACA, and so what we also intend to do with True North Talk is to also promote those other programs with the hope that they'll also promote us. And because we think that each of the programs that are running have a unique style that's very, very good at catering to their audience and doing very well with that. And for us, because it'll be a new program, of course, we'll have to learn about our audience and find out what they like and go along with that as well. So we're looking forward to getting that up and running. I am literally building a studio for it. We're going to start small and work from something that I'll be building at one of my facilities, and then we'll be able to hopefully improve from there. So the website for this program is www.truenorthtalk.ca, just spelled how it sounds, but in case people wanted to know more about it. So yeah, that's some of the things that we're hoping to do. We're wanting to really focus in the future, once the pandemic is over, on having the different community-oriented events where people can see each other in person. We can go for hikes in the woods. We can do some kind of activity at a park, some kind of a picnic, different things as well. Maybe some kind of a book club if we find the right people who want to run these kinds of things, because there's a lot of work behind it. So to organize.
So if these events would be across Canada, so people in Vancouver, people in Toronto, people in the Maritimes, that kind of thing. So
yeah, we've got people. There's a person in Ontario who's expressed an interest, and another gentleman in Quebec who would like to be quite active in this. So we're hoping that we can cover every province and territory in Canada in the future.
So does Canadian Atheist, do you sort of function like AAI does? It's sort of like an umbrella organization for organizations across the world that you're dealing with, like the local organizations in the different provinces and cities, or you're?
Well, not really. We're a nationwide organization, and we'll have I guess it'll be probably a little bit more like the Atheist Republic, how they have different
consulates.
Yeah, consulates. We're not thinking to use the word consulate, but it's a very interesting structure they have. So we're looking to probably break it down regionally, group a number of provinces and territories together. So we have maybe 4 or 5 different groups of these, and then have people at these different in the different provinces and territories to organize a local event in those places so that people can partake and actually be at these things actively. So, and one of the things like that we're promoting as well is that the demographic of atheism is people who don't believe in deities. They don't believe in any goddesses or gods. We do have some members who are theists because they tell us that they really like the approach that we're using. And so this to us is quite nice to see. But the vast majority of our members are atheists as far as we know. And so the nice thing about this demographic is it is one of among the most diverse demographics in the world, from what I can tell. So that provides a wonderful opportunity to bring people together with diverse interests and make for a greater potential to have really interesting conversations and meet interesting people and hopefully get suggestions for other activities that we can host that people would like to participate in, because it seems that there's people really do want to have that sense of community, of people being together and socializing, you know.
Yeah, it is very much a community. So I know from my own personal experience, we have a gentleman in one of our local organizations, who was a Jehovah's Witness, who he's been disfellowshipped since coming out as an atheist. So the atheist community sort of became his alternate family, and that community for him, having lost his, his family doesn't talk, his own children don't talk to him anymore. But so I can definitely see how I've personally witnessed how the atheist community can be a bonding experience for people, especially if you're coming from either a family or a region, such as like say the Bible Belt of the States, where it's such the Bible and Christianity is such a strong part of their whole life. It is important that there is a community. So I applaud you for creating that for the free thinkers in the world and in Canada.
We've had to put it all on hold because of the pandemic. The timing has not worked in our favor, but we're looking forward to getting to that point very soon, where we'll be able to start organizing these events. It's very sad to me when somebody leaves a group, a social group of any sort, and then finds themselves ostracized. To me, I see that as antisocial. And one of the neat things about atheism that I like to tell people about is that there's nothing in atheism that says you have to always be an atheist. A person can then join a religion, start believing in a deity or deities, and they don't lose their atheist friends. They don't get shunned for it. That's not how atheism communities operate. And at least from what I've seen, I haven't seen people doing that. Once in a while, you might see somebody giving hassle to someone who's become religious, but those tend to be, from what I gather, is in the minority, to the point where it's almost insignificant. It's so rare, at least here in Canada it is. Mileage may vary in other countries, but as far as I know here in Canada, it's pretty good this way. I think perhaps there could be cultural reasons for this as well here, because here in Canada, a lot of people don't really put a lot of effort into openly displaying how religious they are. It's kind of generally thought of by a lot of people as more of a private matter, just like how politics and people voting in elections is more of a private decision. People usually don't ask each other about this stuff here. It's generally kind of not a major focus point, these kinds of things.
Yeah, well, that actually brings me, that's a nice segue to the next point I want to talk about. We had David Rand on about 2 weeks ago, who was president of another AAI affiliate in Montreal, and he was on talking about Bill 21 in Quebec. And he mentioned most of the opposition, he said, is coming from groups outside of Quebec who don't really have a vested interest in this, but are nevertheless very vocal about their opposition to what they see as suppressing the rights of religious people to display their religious iconography while they're on duty. Now, as David mentioned, primarily Bill 21 is only aimed at people in positions of authority who are civil servants, such as judges, police, and teachers, who can't have any sort of visible, like if you're a Sikh wearing a turban or Muslim women wearing a hijab sort of thing. So you said you're familiar with this, so can maybe give us your perspective, being outside of Quebec.
I do have some familiarity with this because it is important that all of Canada be consistent with how we implement our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is part of our Canadian Constitution. Quebec is an interesting case, though, because it's the only province or territory, it's a province, that has not signed on to Confederation, as far as I know. And so there's sometimes questions about whether they need to comply with our charter and our constitution. They tend to comply with it for the most part, but a number of years ago, they brought in language police who policed language on storefronts. And if there was any English signage, they were fined. The owner was fined, and the business owner, and the signs had to be removed. It was kind of a French-only idea. And, of course, this violates Section 2 of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms if it's government, because that primarily, for the most part, applies to government. But there's also our Human Rights Code, which protects our freedoms that are mostly consistent with our charter as well. So freedom of expression is not being respected there, and that does deserve a charter challenge. I think if the government's enforcing this, they can't. So that's where Section 2 of our charter would be in violation. Now, since they've not joined Confederation, one of the questions that could come up here is whether they have to comply with it. And then, of course, there's also, I think it's Section 33 or 32, I don't remember which one offhand, but it's known as the Notwithstanding Clause, which allows a province or territory to, for a short number of years, I think it's 5 years possibly, to ignore a number of our charter rights, including our rights and freedoms in Section 2 and the non-discrimination parts in Section 15 and other parts. So they have to renew that, otherwise it by default goes back to not being in effect. Ontario, I believe right now, or up till very recently, had that in effect. They used the Notwithstanding Clause so that they could ignore people's rights here, and the government could go ahead and violate what would normally be their rights to freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, and other such freedoms. And to me, I find that section to be offensive and consistent with systemic injustice. I really think that it needs to be removed from our charter. And so if Quebec, I don't know if they have, but if they have instituted that Notwithstanding Clause, then the way that's all written out, the charter challenge would fail if that was in effect while they were doing that. So there's a number of different factors, of course. There's a lot to it. As far as people like police officers and other civil servants, people working at a government office where someone's coming into the office for help, if they see the religious symbolism and they're talking to our government, and part of their problem is because they're trying to get help to get away from somebody who is associated with that same religion, it's possible they may change their mind and not ask for that help, and that's a concern. So that's one of the concerns that comes up. It's tricky because when people are working in these roles, they need to be presenting the government accurately. At the same time, of course, the flip side of that is they have their rights to associate with these different religious groups. So it comes down to almost like, is this a form of advertising? And because many of these religious institutions that people are associated with are quite profitable. They make a lot of money. And not all of them are registered as nonprofit societies. So there's quite a lot of arguments on both sides of it. So this is where a Supreme Court ruling needs to come into play, because they tend to be a lot more well thought out in how these things are exercised. So it's like, how far can a dress code go is part of it, right? So for myself, I'm not keen on the idea personally of going up to a government service in our secular country and being greeted by somebody who's wearing a giant golden symbol of their religion that's right on their chest. It's like, I'm wondering, okay, so what's the deal here? It seems out of place. So
you seem to be kind of halfway between their personal rights and the rights of the citizenry that they're getting from the government, that they expect the government to be secular. So and it is a tricky situation.
And that's because I'm striving to look at it in as non-subjective a way as I possibly can and understand the issues. I think more discussion is needed on this. There needs to be some clarity for sure that's consistent with our law, and also taking into consideration human rights, which we do sign on to that in our in the United Nations with the Canada does with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So we do take that very seriously, and we take it so seriously that we don't allow things like the death penalty. We don't have capital punishment here. It's just doesn't happen. So it's so we're doing things correctly in that way. My own personal view on capital punishment is it is a form of systemic murder. If the person who is put onto death row doesn't want to die. I do have a solution to it for countries that do have capital punishment. I know I'm going a little off topic here, but I do think that a better approach would be just a life sentence with an option after a minimum number of years determined by the courts. So they ensure a minimum amount of time served. That any point after that, the person who is convicted can apply to the courts and then get the death penalty at that point. And then that way, their right to bodily autonomy is not violated, and our human rights flow through. Like here in Canada, our people who are in prison do have the right to vote in the elections. In many countries, that's not the case for prisoners. They lose that right just because they're in prison. What happens if they're wrongly convicted? Their democratic rights have been taken away from them unfairly. And other rights. And the thing is, they're still a human being. They're still a person, and they should still have these rights. So that's my feeling on it. So
okay,
but
well, that brings us to another topic I wanted to bring up with you, especially your bit on the bodily rights. So there was a report about a week ago about a Baptist minister in Ontario who has now transitioned and has been fired by the Baptist Church. So. To me, I mean, again, this is like Bill 21. This is a very complex sort of web of, the rights of the person versus the rights of the organization or the institution. So yeah. I would think a church, has its own protected rights. It has its own sort of a code of conduct or standards it expects from its employees. And if somebody who has exercised their personal freedom to that bodily autonomy to transition, so where's sort of that line between what the rights of the church to have its employees follow its code of conduct and the employee to live their freedom. So what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I'll level it out and say the rights of a church as an organization be the same as any organization, business, nonprofit, society, or otherwise. So right off the bat, I'm going to look at it that way. I don't believe that in my opinion, I don't think a religious institution deserves any more special treatment that any other organization would get. It should be the same. Right. So right off the bat, that's one thing. So this person was working for the church. They were a minister.
I believe it was a Baptist pastor who's now transitioned and has apparently been fired. So, I mean, similarly, I think I've seen some stories as well about teachers at Catholic schools who've been fired for lifestyle choices. So I imagine it's fairly similar. And your point about any organization shouldn't be allowed to penalize people's personal lives. So I think that's a very valid point. So,
what was their reason for terminating the employment of that minister?
I guess because the Baptists tend to be a lot more conservative than other denominations. I didn't look into the story too deeply, okay. But I'm guessing it's because they felt that this person's lifestyle was inconsistent with their role as a pastor within the church.
Okay, so if we were to assume, because we don't know offhand, but if we were to assume that the reason this person, now we're getting hypothetical here because we don't know for certain, but if they had fired this person because they are suddenly the wrong sex for the job, that sounds to me like discrimination, because when you look at somebody who is preaching at a church, leading a congregation, to me, it doesn't seem that their sex should matter. What matters is that they can lead the congregation in that, So have their qualifications changed in a way that's not unreasonable. And so to me, I'm thinking that does sound unreasonable to fire somebody just because their sex has changed, their biological sex. But again, we're assuming that that's the reason that
Right.
this person was fired. If again, a person has the right to bodily autonomy. Now, if you're being hired, say, for casting in a movie, this would be an example of a reasonable discernment to say, okay, you want somebody who is a certain height, a certain build, has a certain complexion, has certain hair color. Hair color they can change anyway, but not everybody wants to go through that, right? So it's chemicals and stuff, as I understand it. And then they want someone who's a particular sex and whatnot. So to fulfill a certain role. This is what I think is not an unreasonable criteria to specify when you're hiring somebody, because they do need to fit a specific role there. And now the question, I guess, would become, is it reasonable for the church to do this, to say that this is a requirement? And I don't think it is reasonable, because I don't think what a person's sex should be a requirement for public speaking, for leading a congregation. Right. So, because that would be a violation of Section 15 of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and a violation of their human rights. So they shouldn't be discriminating on that, even in their hiring policy, even if it was. So I'm definitely not in favor of what the church is doing, if that's the reason that they fired this person.
Right.
Sounds
like from if your logic is sound, that legally this woman probably has a case and will probably win her discrimination suit. So okay. So is there anything else?
She's suing for discrimination, is she?
I presume it would be wrongful dismissal, that she's being discriminated against for her lifestyle choice.
Okay. Yeah. What a person does in their personal time is up to them. I've worked at companies over the years that would try to have all the employees sign a non-disclosure agreement. And the non-disclosure agreement is fine. We keep all the things secret. We don't divulge the trade secrets and other proprietary information of the company. That's fine. That has to apply all around. But sometimes what they slip into these non-disclosure agreements, these companies, is a condition that any, like for software development, which is kind of, I'm in that side of things a little bit. If you developed any software at any time, the company owns it. And the way it's worded was very loose. And so I went to this employer and I said, I can't sign this. And they said, well, why not? Everybody else does. It's a standard contract. I said, it's not a standard contract. The moment I sign it, it's been customized. So no, it's not standard. And I said, look, this part here says that any software I program, that I develop, at any time, it doesn't specify just at work. It says at any time that you guys own it. And I do software development as a hobby. This was a long time ago when I was doing my own software development and getting paid for that kind of work, separate from my regular job, which was doing help desk IT work. So I wasn't doing any programming for my job, but it didn't matter. It's what I do on my own time. And I said, look, this stuff's on my own time. You guys don't have a right to it, and you can't take it. And so they went to their legal department, went back and forth and negotiated a bit, and then they changed the wording. And I guess they decided to. And they said they're just changing that only for me. And so,
yeah, because they know most people don't bother to read them. So
that's right. Yeah. But I don't want it to come back to me where if something didn't go right and they saw some software by Randolf Richardson out on the marketplace and they said, this guy works for us and he created it this time that he's working for us. We own that. Let's go get it. He signed an agreement. I don't want that happening to me. So because they're not paying me on my off time.
Yeah, and some of these organizations do have morality clauses, which is, I guess, is what allows them to get away with it. But what somebody does in their personal life, outside of their professional responsibilities, really isn't their
Yeah.
prerogative. But
And so that's the
religions seem to think they're special. So
Yeah, and that's the point. We need to stand up for our rights. So I'm glad this person is suing for discrimination, assuming that's what they were terminated for.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And again, devil's in the details. So they say there could be more to it. There could be other reasons that they're being terminated. And I suppose that will all come out in the case. And we'll see what they come up with.
So are you aware of any other sort of religious discrimination cases in Canada, or?
Well, there was a number of years ago, Trinity Western University, I think is actually the correct name for it, had a covenant that, as they called it, just a small contract that every student there had to sign. And so they're a university that also teaches law. Not all the universities do that. So they're one of the ones that does. So they're a law school as well. And the law students didn't want to sign it. And I had spoken with some people at the local law society here and encouraged them to go for it and pursue this. I said, here's what you do. I suggest you talk to all your members, send out a poll and find out if they think this is worth pursuing, what their opinion is on it. Anyway, that went to court. Trinity Western University fought it. I contacted Trinity Western University and said I'd be willing to debate this with your law professors if you want, or whoever wants to debate it. Let's go and do a public forum, public debate on this. I'll be there. And I offered that to them, and they never responded. I assumed that they were probably quite busy at the time, and because this was becoming quite a major issue in the public eye, in the news and whatnot. So there's some people who think that they were avoiding me, but I wasn't that well known for debating back then, so I don't think that was it. I think they were just busy. But they and I did try to contact them a few times, but there's nothing. So nobody contacts them out of the blue, and they're not going to do anything. So that went on, and they went back and forth, and it finally got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled, consistent with our charter, that they couldn't impose this on the law students. What I like about that judgment is that it's protecting people's rights to choose that, and there were things in that covenant that stated that you had to be you couldn't be engaging in sexual intercourse with people unless you're married to that person, and all kinds of personal life stuff. And you're to report anybody who's engaging in homosexual behavior and those sorts of things, or stuff like that. And so it was considered to be quite unacceptable, and for good reason, for obvious reasons.
So by the covenant, you said it was not imposed on the law students, so it was only an exception for the law students, or they said they couldn't apply it to all the students?
And that's the part that disappointed me about the judgment, is that it only applied to their law program. It didn't apply to all the other programs, and it should have, because it needs to be equal across the board. So it's still, to me, it's an outstanding issue, but I suspect that a lot of the students going there are probably already Christian, already religious, and okay with it. Those values are consistent with what they want. The reason it became an issue for the law program is because there is a limited number of law schools out there, and a limited number of positions available for students to join a law program. So it's a little bit of a scarce commodity. So you've got people who are not religious, who are going to any university they can go to get their law training, their law degree. And so I think that's why this came up.
Okay.
So,
right.
Yeah.
So one of the other issues in Canada lately has been this residential schools. This made international headlines of all these bodies that are being found.
Yeah.
And I've been looking at the news feed on Facebook of my Canadian friends, and one in particular has been posting some comments that aside from the sort of the initial shock headline, nothing much seems to be done. Like, where's the accountability of the people who ran these schools, who basically covered up the deaths of thousands of people? why are they not in jail? I mean, have you been
Well,
covering this at all?
no, the thing is, there is an ongoing investigation, and with the high number of graves that are still being found, it's taking time to do this. So the RCMP is investigating. That's our national police force, and as I understand it, they are working with local Indigenous groups and other local communities and whatnot to make sure that things are being investigated thoroughly and properly. And so these investigations don't happen overnight. They need to do the investigation. They need to find out who did what. They need to find out the extent of the damage. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of factors they need to look into before they can start arresting people. Because we here in Canada, our legal system is that everyone's presumed innocent until proven guilty. So before Crown will prosecute, they want to have solid evidence so they know that the case is going to be a good case and it's going to be worthwhile pursuing. Our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did call for the Pope to come to Canada and issue a formal apology publicly. And as I understand it, there has not been a response to that, unless some new development has occurred in the last month or so. I don't believe there's been any response from the Vatican on that, so they don't seem too interested.
I thought I read something that the Pope has invited some leaders of the Indigenous community to come to the Vatican, I think, and have a discussion.
So he's not coming here to do it. He's not coming here to do this. It's interesting that he's ignoring that request, and sure, it's great if he's doing that. Why not other people too? Because this is a concern for all Canadians. There's been a history of a lack of political will and churches left to run the residential schools, and then of course, the people who are sent to residential schools, majority happen to be Indigenous people. In other countries like Ireland, it's a different demographic, but the same thing is happening there. There's a friend of mine who is in Ireland who was telling me about this back in July, I think it was. And I think he was saying about 800 graves roughly were overturned there were found there in Ireland, and so it's more tragedy there. And again, residential schools run by the Catholics, and then there's been other countries like the U.S. where this is happening, and it just seems to be a pattern that these Catholic-run residential schools have this grotesque history.
Right. Well, it's not just the Catholics. I think the Anglican Church and some other churches were involved as well. But I think the statistic I saw that it was only about 25% of the schools were non-Catholic run. So
okay.
Your point about Ireland. So anybody who's watching this, who might be interested to see it. There's a good movie called The Magdalen Sisters. Came out I think about 20 years ago now. I think it came out like around 2003, if I'm remembering correctly. That talks about like these women who got pregnant in Ireland, like back up through the last. Probably, I'm not sure when they closed down, were sent to these Magdalen laundries where they were basically worked to death and sexually abused over and over again. So if anybody's interested, you can check out The Magdalen Sisters as a movie and sort of see what Randolph is talking about. So,
yeah, thank you. These atrocities do need to be dealt with. Obviously, the past can't be changed. But going forward, what I am glad about is that this matters to so many people because it is an important issue. A lot of children died, probably very painfully, I would guess, because I don't think the people who were killing them would have been nice about it. I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. So, with the lack of political will, my understanding is that there have been complaints about this for quite a long time here, and the complaints have not been addressed until just recently. But there is political will now to deal with it.
Hard to ignore thousands of bodies, so you can't just sweep that under the cover or under the rug and pretend anymore.
Oh yeah. But if the political will says no, then Crown won't prosecute, and then unless the case really has merit, and they're going to say, look, we can't avoid this. But it's just. There are things in our system I think do need to change. There needs to be more autonomy at the Crown level for deciding which cases to prosecute and whatnot.
And they don't have that? They're not separate from the government?
Well, they do, but my understanding is that there's still there has to be political will for major cases as well somehow. Like there's different parties looking into it and different things going on. Like here we don't have any elected judges. I'll give you another example. All our judges are appointed, but the appointment process is quite extensive, and there's a lot of different groups that are involved in that. And as I understand it, the politicians have a very small percentage of impact on the decision making on that. It's not a major part of their decision. Their preference is not a major part of the decision. It's just maybe counts for 5 or 10% or something. So there's a lot of different groups look into it. They look into the background of the lawyer that they decide to call to the bench, so to speak. And I know of people who were selected to become judges, and from what I know of them, they're all very nice people. They're all really good listeners. They're people like dealing with them. So we've had, not every decision has been the best one, but the vast majority have been quite good. And so when you get judges who get called to the bench, they don't have to worry about getting reelected. So they end up focusing, they have a tendency to focus on working on implementing the law in the best possible ways. Whereas when I look at some other countries like the US, where they do have elected judges, they're quite often, they look a little bit, some of them seem more like politicians to me, and seem to be, I wonder if their decisions are really as impartial as they're supposed to be, if they're thinking about in the back of their mind if a particular decision might ruin their chances for re-election. So that's right. A concern. Now there's people who favor that, and they've got their arguments as well. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we should probably wrap it up now. We've been talking for a while, and anyways, well, I thank you for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to state about what you're working on before we wrap up?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's fine. We're I guess we got off on a bit of a tangent there with the judges and all that.
No problem.
We're one of the campaigns that we are putting forward is a Normalized Atheism campaign. There's a hashtag, Normalized Atheism. And there's a number of different groups that have gotten behind this and supporting us on it. And we've even had a few theists tell us they really like this approach we're using as well. It's a gentle, non-confrontational approach. When somebody is asked if they believe in a god or deities or whatever, and they respond yes, it's typically regarded as a normal thing, and people carry on with the conversation or with whatever they're doing. What we're asking for is for atheists to be treated as the same as the theists when we say no to that question. But what happens right now is when we say no, there are quite a few people who will react with shock and surprise, or like it's a bad thing, or we're going to be going to hell, or that we need some kind of help or some kind of condescension. So we're asking people to do less and not go and do all those things and just treat us like anybody else, because we think it's normal to not believe things. We're not saying it's not normal to be religious, because there's a lot of people who are religious, and that's fine. You know, they make their choice. You know, they're not imposing it on other people. I don't have a problem with it. You know, so we're hoping that this will help to reduce or even eliminate the stigma, or at least some of the stigma that's out there against atheists. It still, unfortunately, persists today to some degree.
I would imagine it's probably worse in the U.S. than in Canada. With they've got a large evangelical population. I imagine it's not as bad in Canada.
Yeah, the U.S. is definitely known for that. That's true, and I hear complaints from that. We get requests from people through the Canadian Atheists. People want to move from the U.S. here to Canada, and they ask us what's the immigration process like. So we link right on our website, CanadianAtheists.ca. We have on the resources section, we have some information about immigration. It just points to the government websites for this. So you're looking at the official source for it. We're not recommending any particular lawyers or anything like that, because that's not what we do. But that way, at least people can get familiar with our legal system a little bit, and familiar with the immigration process. So it can be a long one. There are lawyers who do a lot of work in those areas, and can be very helpful with making sure the process goes through smoothly. So we also get requests from people in other countries, but primarily whenever there's an election coming up where there's controversial people running for the president role, that's when we'll see a lot more. We'll see an uptick in an increase in people requesting they want to come and move to Canada if so-and-so gets elected. And it's, I don't know how many people actually do it. As I understand, some do, but I think the number is pretty low overall. I think it's more people just making a lot of noise, but some of them do seem very serious, and it seems they feel like stuff that happens in politics is going to have a detrimental effect on their lives, and it's sad, really. It shouldn't be like that.
Yeah,
because I do,
and that's changing. And the demographics are shifting in our favor. So
yeah,
but there's still a ways to go to normalize it. So it's good to
doing
a campaign for that.
Yeah, and I do think the U.S. is a great country. There's a lot of really compelling features and benefits and advantages to being an American in the world, right? So I wouldn't want to see a bunch of people just give up and leave. It's just then what's left. Yeah, you want to have people think of that as their home. It strikes me as that you shouldn't be wanting to leave your home. You should be wanting to stay and make it better if you can, right? So I definitely want to encourage that, because I do think that they've been a good neighbor overall for us, and a few ups and downs over the years, but for the most part it's been actually a good relationship, and our borders are pretty open. It's fairly easy for people to cross, except not during the pandemic right now, but generally it's been pretty easy for people to cross back and forth. I know lots of people go to the US to shop, and there's some Americans that come up here a lot to shop and tour around because we have a nice environment and all that. So there's different things to do. So we do cross a lot, and so it's good, and I'd like to see that continue, and because overall I do think the U.S. is a lot better than many people make it out to be. So
yeah, okay. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and I'll definitely put in some links in the description for the viewers to your site, to True North Talk, to Canadian Atheists.
And great. Thank you.
So I'd invite our watchers, please like and subscribe, and check out the Canadian Atheists. And if you are someone who's got something to say, let us know. Maybe you'd like to be on Randolph's show, True North Talk, once they get up and running. So we'd love to have you guys come on. And thank you to Randolph and the Canadian Atheists for everything you guys are doing. So,
well, thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great. All right. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International, and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. See you next time.